Shisana, you've been around the block, out of the country, in the country, but you've also been one of the key people around health in South Africa. Tell us the change in responsibilities from living in a province used to be called Northern Province of South Africa to moving into exile. What happened in your life during that period?
I grew up in a rural area where apartheid was something that was academic, except when you went to town. My father used to tell us to go and work in the farm and carry whatever produce we have, put it in the car for him to go and sell it for us in town. That's how we got our clothes, that's how we got our money for tuition at school and so forth. So we used to go to town and would see how they were treating, my father in particular. As he was driving the car, it seems like he had no right to be in town. Whenever he was driving a car, they were kind of insulting him. That kind of began conscientizing us to say something must be wrong with this society. Why is it that we black people, when we go to town, we're told that we can't drive, we shouldn't be here? And yet he was a very good, conscientious driver. He had been driving for many years. So we then were forcefully moved by the apartheid government. They moved us from Makotopong, and we then moved on to the new Makotopong, what is called Nuetgedacht, which fell under Chief Dechale. And when we arrived there, it was terrible. We put on tents. It was raining. It was cold. It was everything that you can imagine of living in a tent. And after a while, we all started building, putting our, whatever resources we have to start building the place. So we built the place. And in building the place, we got interest, obviously, in going to the university. We no longer could farm and get, much of our produce to pay for it. Therefore, my father said, Lord, let me set up a business. Let me set up a store, and he set up a general dealer and so forth. And we all had to build it ourselves. I remember I was learning how to drive a big van and went to the river to go and get sand and build. After doing all of that, we had enough money now to be able to pay for university education. So I went to University of the North at the time, now called University of Limpopo. And when we got there, we then began feeling the real wrath of apartheid. All those things that we experienced when we were young, of seeing it in town, now they were happening right in our own campus. The apartheid government wasn't really that soft on us. So we had Abraham Tiro, who was a leader at that particular time, and he then decided that, look, it's not correct for the whites to come in and occupy the front seats at graduation ceremony when they haven't paid a single penny for these young people who are graduating. The parents struggle just to put them here, and yet the parents have to sit at the back far from seeing their own children when they're graduating. So we then participated in the demonstration. We started being, radical and saying that it shouldn't be the way it is. So we decided also to participate. And I will never forget the scene the day they threw us out, all of us, from the campus. And they put in a guard of honor for us with a white police wearing uniform and with dogs and guns. And they made a guard of honor for us to get out of the hall where we're congregating because we're refusing to get out. So they decided that they're going to take us all out to leave. And you felt that if you were to cough or to say something, either the gun is going to shoot you or the dog is going to get at you, the bulldogs. And we, left. So when we came back, we left and we all dispersed and went everywhere else. I then took that time and I went to University of Natal, the medical section, which was the black section. And that's where I met Steve Biko. And in fact, he picked me up from the train station. And he said, oh, you're Temba Sono's younger sister, so let me help you, because my brother Temba used to be with Sasso. So when I got there, he says, no, let me take you. And he took me, and he brought me to the campus. And shared with me the struggles that they were experiencing. So I was like, okay, so I'm not alone in Tefloop. You know, it's not just Tefloop, there's also other campuses that are actually having similar problems. That's what helped me to conscientize. So when I came back to the university, when they opened it, I actually became part of the SRC now, because now I was conscientized about, you know, what should happen. I was with people like Thabo Molewa, like Dennis Makudu, you know, and Aubrey was, you know, there, Aubrey Mogoena was there. So there were quite a number of activists that were there. And at that time, we really Black consciousness movement. That's a kind of thinking that SASO was. The thinking was much more on the Black, you know, consciousness movement. So when I finished, I decided to take up a job in Tembisa. And in Tembisa, when I was there, I actually became a social worker. And I then began feeling again and again this discrimination that was just intolerable. Whenever the white administrators were to talk to me, they talked to me through the window. They came outside and talked through the window as if they came into my room where I was, you know, something would contaminate them. You know, I kind of felt like I don't need to be here, because if I'm here, then, you know, they didn't feel like they needed to be here, the same room with me, so they had to talk to me like, and I then asked question, why is it that you have to talk to me like that? I mean, can't you just come in and sit down and talk? And they just got very irritated with me. So I started organizing, you know, there with the unions there, and we all started talking and just saying, look, this is not on, and we're planning a strike at that particular time. And then they decided they're going to clamp on me. Even before these things could just, you know, materialize in a big way, they're going to clamp on me. So I heard about that, and I decided with, at the time I was dating William, because he was my high school sweetheart, you know, for many years. And I then said to him that, look, it looks like we're going to have a problem here. And he said, yeah, looks like you're going to have a problem. So one guy told us that they were definitely looking for me there. So we decided to get into the car, and he had a car. He was driving a car, you know, at the time. And I think it was a Chrysler. We got into the car, and then he said to me, you must lie down. I'm going to take newspapers and put on top of you, because they shouldn't see you. And I said, oh, you think we can make it? He says, yeah. And we got out. Hey, they saw us, and they chased us. So it was a big chase, and we drove in the evening and drove and drove and drove and drove until we got to Mamelodi. And when I was, the reason we're there, in fact, at that particular place for that day, we had gone in to pick up something, and that something we were to need in case we had to get out of the country. And I don't want to say what it was, because I think it was illegal for us to be able to get, you know, what we needed in order to be able to get out of the country, because you either were going to, you know, be shot at if you try to cross the border elsewhere else, or you got to find a way of being able to get out legally without them picking up that, you know, you're going out. So William and I then traveled, and we all went to Mamelodi, and we slept in Mamelodi that night. For following morning, we said, no, we've got to get out here, you know, and leave. We can't. So, and I've skipped a whole lot of things that happened before then, because before then I had gone back to I left the job. I just couldn't do that job anymore. I left it and tried to run my father's business, you know, for quite some time. And the police decided to come there. They decided to follow me, and my parents were always, you know, taking me and hiding me at my grandmother's place. And they would always come and say, where is she? We know she's here. We know she's involved in this a protest at, you know, Tefloop and all that kind of thing. So we then said, no. My parents said, you know, it won't be good for you to be here. So they took our pictures, everything that, you know, showed that we were alive or anything. They buried them in the garden. So they buried all of those pictures in the garden. And unfortunately, over time, you know, the people who came in to buy that place built on top of that. So we'll never get those pictures. But anyway, we left the country through Swaziland. And when we got to Swaziland, at the border, and they looked at the papers that we had, they said, okay, you can go. Because we got them fraudulently, but I won't tell you any details about it. So we got out there, and we got into Swaziland. So once we arrived in Swaziland, we thought we were going to stay with someone whom my sister had organized that we can stay with. And that person immediately had received a call to say, did you receive people like this? And they described us that, you know, her name is Olive Sono, and her husband, you know, William Shisana. The two of them are there, and they were driving a Chrysler car. Did you receive them? And he immediately said, get out of here. You can't stay here. If I keep you here, they're going to come in. South African, what's it called? What did you call them? The branch, special branch. Special branch is going to come in and get you. So we then decided, hey, where do we go? He said, try Mozambique. Swaziland is not safe. Try Mozambique. And we drove to Mozambique. When we got on the road, there was a guy, his name was Garin, I think it was Garin. He gave us a ride. I mean, he asked for a ride, and we said, okay, fine, you can come in, you can show us, because we don't know anybody in Mozambique. And as we're driving, he was able to communicate with Frelimo. Frelimo was actually all over the road, and they had their own little Kalashnikovs, young kids at Kalashnikovs. And
Frelimo was the Mozambican liberation movement.
Yeah, it was at the time, you know, the liberation movement at the time. So we drove, and he negotiated for us all the way until when we got there. He then put us up with a brother-in-law, and we stayed with the brother-in-law for a while. And then he then sent us to the United Nations to say that, look, you have got to take these people to the UN. And that's how we ended up, you know, with the UN. And from there, we stayed in Mozambique for about, 18 months. And I tell you, it was a harrowing experience, because at a young age, you had all these young soldiers that were trained, and they didn't understand what it is to protect anyone. Their job was just to shoot, if at all they need to shoot. That's all they were trained to do. So
many people in the urban areas have a lack of understanding how the forced removals happens in the rural areas.
Yeah.
The story is always about forced removals in the urban areas, in the metropoles. Give us a sense of how did it happen in the rural areas?
Oh, they came in and they said to the community, we've declared this place a white area, and we are going to be using this place from now onward. One for it's a bombing range, which is still a bombing range today, on one side. The other side is going to be a farm, and you all need to move here because we've declared this place a white area. And the reason they declared it is because the place was so beautiful. It had mountains all around and hills and the river, around it. So they forcefully moved us by coming in with the big trucks, and they would put everything you have, and take you and just dump you in a dusty place, and they didn't even care. And then you found yourself without a place, to live, and when it rains, you all get wet, and they didn't care. And the worst part of it is that there was very, very little compensation for your property, so little that you couldn't build a house again with that money. And thanks God that, the ANC came into power, because they were able to restore the land back to us. Mm-hmm. So we now have that land. And yeah.
Tell us, at a young age, on the one hand is this what's happening around you and how that influences your own view of the world that you're living in. Is it conceivable there were also people, young people, older people than you at the time that influenced, that serve as a role model to you on your own struggle as a young person?
Well, I think for me, Abraham Tiro was a very important person in our lives because he was the first one that we really dealt with who stood up and said, this cannot be. We cannot be treated the way we are treated. And we saw him as a role model. That's why it was so painful when we heard that he was actually sent a parcel bomb and killed in Botswana. It was a very painful experience because we're like, this was the person we looked up to who said, let's carry on, with the struggle. So he was a really very important person at that particular time. We were not, at that time, we were not even thinking about the Mandelas, the Sisulus, and all that. We're young people were looking at where we were. The other person that obviously played a greater role in terms of our own, perception, in my own family, is my own brother, Themba Sono, because he was very tough in terms of the apartheid government. He was not compromising when it came to the apartheid government, even though there were times when people called him all sorts of things simply because he said, let us work with the Bantu stance in order to change this administration. We'll never change it without getting them involved. It was only years later that people actually realized what it is that he was saying when the ANC came into power and started bringing all this Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Mangopes and Nsangwese and all of that. The other person that played a role, for me that was important was Steve Biko. That very trip that he took me from the train station, to University of Natal was a defining moment for me to say that here's somebody who is an activist and is a medical student. He's very serious about being a medical student, but at the same time, he's an activist. He cares beyond his own situation of being a student, because he's saying that let me not just become a medical doctor, but let me be a medical doctor with a conscience of, a broader society rather than just myself. So that played a critical role for me.
What is the significance of that in your own life?
Well,
over the years?
Over years, I found myself working in public service. I left Mozambique and went to Tanzania, and the ANC sent me to this thing. Assisted me to get to the United States. I remember they gave me $20. It was the Alfred Nzo, the Secretary General of the ANC, and Mendim Simang. They gave me $20 and said, here's $20. Here is a telephone number for the ANC office in New York. Don't get lost. And I got there, and I started, being a student there, working there. But as soon as I had an opportunity, was to enter the master's degree, enter a doctoral degree at Johns Hopkins University. When I finished, I immediately organized some of our colleagues in the United States. I said, let us go and serve the people of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is predominantly black. Many experts don't want to go and work from Washington, D.C. We come in from one of the best universities in the world, Johns Hopkins University. At the time, it was like top 5 universities in the world. And I said, let us go and work there. And so several of us went to work there, Dr. Marsha Lily Blanton, Dr. Vincent Coffey, myself. I can't remember there's another one, I can't remember the name. But we all decided to go and work in Washington, D.C. And people asked us, how can you have a degree from Johns Hopkins University, which allows you to work anywhere else, and you choose to go and work in Washington, D.C.? We said, because that's where most of the people are suffering.
In a public institution?
In a public institution. It was the Research and Statistics Division, Vital Records. The births and deaths recorded in Washington, D.C., I ended up being the person who had to register them. So anyone in Washington, D.C. who died or was born, or who married or divorced, had my name, on that. But to me, that was more important, to feel that I've got to serve the people of Washington, D.C. So when I came back to South Africa, I was given a job at the MRC, and it was a prestigious job. But I said, okay, I'll work at the MRC part of the time, but the other time, I'm going to help the University of the Western Cape to set up a school of public health, because public health is so important to have. We have all medical schools, we've got masters in the area of medicine, but we actually don't have a school of public health, which is going to prevent diseases amongst all these people that we have in our country. We said we were oppressed by apartheid for a very long time. We actually need to do something about this. So I then took up a part-time of my job to set up that school of public health with Jakes Gevel, who was a great person who helped me to actually, do that work. Then after that, of course, I ended up being asked to serve as a Director General of Health. First as a special advisor to the minister, and then as a Director General of Health.
Okay.
And that first task was to immediately transform South Africa transform the Department of Health so that all the 14 departments that were there from the different provinces, from the Bantustans and all that, can serve all South Africans. That was not an easy job.
So we're now back in South Africa, where you started to look at the transformation of the health sector, in particular health department.
Right.
But at the time of your advisor, Mark Visser, in his book Profiles in the Changing South Africa, and I'm paraphrasing, said this about you, that you didn't trust anyone when you started working as an advisor in the newly democratic elected South Africa. Why would he say a thing like that about you?
No, he was right. I didn't trust them. I'll tell you why I didn't trust them. I went in, the minister appointed me as an advisor to transform, and then she asked me, Minister Zuma, Nkosazana Zuma, asked me to go to the meetings, management meetings.
Who's Nkosazana Zuma, for the record?
Former Minister of Health in South Africa, the first Minister of Health under the democratic dispensation. She asked me to sit in those management meetings and be able to influence them in terms of the direction that we wanted to see happen on the basis of the RDP, on the basis of the ANC health plan. And I went to those meetings. As soon as I got into those meetings, I felt I was not welcome. It was all men except one woman, all white except one colored fellow. And I realized I'm not making a difference. Every time I say something, they just disregard what I say. They didn't even think it was important that I was sent by the minister to sit in those meetings. I then decided, no, man, minister, there's no way that we're going to transform the health department like this. I can go to as many meetings as you want me to go, but we'll never make a change. She said, what do you want to do? I said, well, what I suggest we do, let's create our own structure. And that structure must have both the old order and the new order. The old order has experience in terms of running a service. The new order has got knowledge about what should happen to the people of South Africa, positive knowledge. So if we bring them together, they come in from the provinces, we require that to happen from every province. They all come here, and then we bring into that meeting the Director General under the apartheid government and his Deputy Director Generals. The three of them must actually come to those meetings. They must take instructions from us to go back to those management meetings and convince those people in the management meetings to do what we say should happen. And she said to me, that makes sense. That makes sense. I said, okay, let's do that. I said, because you do have your MINMEC, where the ministers, the minister and the MECs meet, but you don't have a management one. So let's bring them to the management one. And then by the time we come into the MECs, we'll have sorted out all of those things. So she was quite right. He's quite right, Mark, when he says that I didn't trust them. How could I trust them? Because when I went into those meetings, they were not very much enthused about me bringing any ideas.
Was it a race issue, or was it just a gender issue?
It was both. It was both, because, as we're sitting down and doing the transformation of the healthcare system, I sat down and did all the interviews in the Department of Health, right from Deputy Director General all the way up to the director. I sat down with Kun Slaba and I said to Kun, we need to change this so that we have demographics that are similar to South Africa in terms of race and in terms of gender. I said, I know it's going to be difficult to find people, but we're going to do it. And I can tell you, within 1 year of advertising the position and hiring those people, we were actually able to turn it around to become 63% black And we had about 27% female, which was a big change.
Is it Koen Slabbert, the Director General at the time?
Yes, it was Koen Slabbert.
So, what was the significance of it that you needed to ensure a transformed Department of Health?
Well, as indicated, the new people coming in from the democratic movement, UDF as well as progressive people and ANC, they came up with good ideas. We had an RDP that we had to implement, an RDP program, Reconstruction and Development Program, which encapsulated the new thinking of what should happen. And we had the ANC health plan, which actually summarized very, very clearly in concrete terms, in terms of what should be done to make the healthcare system in South Africa achieve equity, reduce the disparities, and ensure that every South African has got access to healthcare and quality healthcare. So we couldn't do it with them. They had no experience of primary healthcare. They had no experience really of what it is we're talking about. They were used to this thing of you have the white, you've got the white Department of Health, you've got the Department of Health for Indians and Department of Health for Coloureds, and then 10 Departments of Health for different ethnic groups. So we're all segmented into structures that they could control. And now we're saying, no, we need one health department that is going to serve the needs of the entire country and give them quality health care, regardless of whether you're in rural area, urban area, regardless of your race, regardless of your gender. We all need to be able to benefit from this new...
But clearly when you stepped into to challenge the status quo at the time of racial segregation, on the one hand, there were gender questions, females were less considered in terms of their views, but also you had 14 different health departments brought together, and you, with a new administration, wanted to create a single institution. Surely there were, at different levels, negative views about what you guys wanting to do and the challenges that you guys faced.
It was difficult. The newspaper articles were full of so many unpleasant things about us. It was extremely difficult. And I do remember specifically one incident that I just want to relate. When we went to do the transformation, I actually brought a guy who was in South Africa. His name was Jacob Gale. I think he's now president of a particular company that deals with medical equipment. He came in to moderate the session because I figured out they're not going to trust me because I didn't trust them. So I must bring someone else who's just independent, who can come in and help us through this process. So we had a meeting and we brought in all the people from the different provinces, the heads of department from the different provinces. And they were not appointed full-time at that particular time. Some of them were still kind of tentative, but some of them were definitely appointed, whom I was part and parcel of doing the interview to bring them. So, and then the bulk of the people that came to that meeting were from the apartheid establishment. So those were the whites that were coming into those meetings. And we were a very small minority. We were nine provinces plus about 2 people, at the top, Ayanda Zaluba and myself, and a few, senior people that kind of sneaked in there. But most of the people were really from the previous administration. So when we got to the meeting, this guy says, okay, let's ask a question. And I'd asked him to ask this question: do we need a Department of Health nationally or not? And they said, what do you mean? We have a Department of Health, we've got positions, what do you mean? He says, no. No one at the moment can say there is a National Department of Health. Let's discuss it. Is there a National Department of Health? Through persuasion, they all agreed eventually that we don't have a National Department of Health. So I said, okay, since we want a National Department, how should it be structured? Tell me what should it do? And they said, it must do this. We spent days, I think 2 days, trying to identify all the things it's supposed to do. And then say, okay, group those things together. So we group them together. And after, or label those things. They label them. And when they finish, they say, this is a new Department of Health, and no one has got any position in it, including myself. I don't have a position in it. It's an empty structure. So we're going to advertise for these positions. My goodness. There was uproar all over. How can she just take us out of our positions? She came in and she brought in this American, to come in and take away. But you know what? We're determined that we're going to advertise and we're going to be very quick in our transformation, because once they get used to you, you'll never do anything with transformation. And indeed, we're very quick. We advertise, we fill the positions, we offer them the letters and all that, and I was the last one to be appointed as Director General. So, Comrade Dala Omar comes to ask me, I'm struggling to transform the Department of Justice. I'm trying to create a new Department of Justice, and these people are objecting. One, they were lawyers, most of those people that were there. They had legal training, they understood exactly what it is that's required. Number two, they were afraid of what they saw happened in the Department of, because I told him that, look, we just did it very quick and immediately established a new institute. You took a long time to try to understand them. Now they know you, they are not going to agree for you to do. So we used to laugh about it. Comrade Dale and I used to laugh about that, to say, hey, but there are some lessons in terms of being very quick. And that's why at the time, I was not very popular in the Department of Health at that time, because they saw what happened. But my popularity in the department came after we now have a new Department of Health, and then we're now bringing everybody together, regardless of whether they were, black, white, Indian, whatever. It didn't matter after that transformation. All of them were just part of the team. And that's why we kept one of the Deputy Director Generals, Haram Pretorius, remained, and Ayanda Nzaluma remained. So, we were able to accommodate them.
You are African, you're black, you come out of came back from an organization that used to be considered a terrorist organization. You worked for them. You're breaking all the barriers that Verwoerd put for black people, African people, maths and science and knowledge. And then you come into, and then you're also a woman. You're facing these difficult circumstances. What does it take from you, of you, to deal with and to navigate the complexities and the difficulties that you faced at the time? Because on the other hand, it was the challenge of the white establishment, but you also had challenges with your own, the mass democratic movement and how it itself saw the transformation of the health department. How did you navigate it? What did you take from Olive during those difficult times?
I think the first thing that really struck me when I got into the Department of Health is that I realized I had to work 10 times as hard as my predecessor to demonstrate that I'm capable. Every time I had to prove myself that I am capable. So I worked long hours, I worked hard, I actually relied a lot on people that were knowledgeable about areas. Department of Health is a huge department, and it covers a huge, huge area. So what I would do is I would identify people, even in the provinces, and say, when I need this kind of information, I'm going to rely on you because you are an expert in this area. So I kind of segmented the leaders in terms of what they are bringing to the table, and then relied on them to succeed. Because I said, if I put my own views only, we're going to crash. Because my views may not be very well informed in all areas. Therefore, I must make sure that I listen to all the people that I worked with. They give me ideas and they strengthen me. And at the particular time, I was the only woman even amongst all the heads of the department at that particular time. So, I learned from them, I respected them, they respected me. They even protected me at very difficult circumstances. Indeed, exceptionally difficult circumstances, but they were prepared to support me.
So what was your secret?
My secret to that is that to succeed in any position, you have to work with the team that you have. Get that team to be solidly behind you in what you do. If you do something that you are not sure of, go to them and say to them, I want to do this, but I'm not sure if at all I'm on the right track. And they'll come with ideas. Sometimes they'll go and work very hard and bring in a solution to you and say, consider this. And I would inevitably adopt it after we've engaged on it. I won't adopt it alone. I would engage the rest of the other people and said, I'm thinking we should do this. Does it make sense to all of you? So that to me I found to be key in leading people. You cannot lead people unless you all have a common goal. And that common goal had to come from the team. It can't be one person's goal. If once it becomes one person's goal, you are sure going to fail, because everybody's going to sit there and say, we're just waiting for her to fail.
There is a phenomena as part of the critique about Olive's work over the years in health, that in the beginning you're very occupied with policy restructuring as opposed to sometimes dealing with a crisis in delivery. Is that a fair comment? What's your response to that? Because obviously people critique from different angles.
I'm not sure if I agree. I agree with that. The first thing that we wanted to do, in fact, the first day I got into the job as a special advisor, it was not even in Pretoria. We were actually in Johannesburg somewhere, I can't even remember which hospital it was, with Nkosazana Zuma, to implement free healthcare for pregnant women and children under 6 years of age. So we went around that, worked on that, and even 1995 released a report with Johnny Broombeck and myself on primary health care, in fact, I think it was 1995 from 96, on free primary health care in terms of how and implementation strategy to introduce universal access to primary health care. I actually went to launch it in Soweto. And I remember that particular day when I came in with the police were riding the what's it called? The horses. Yes, primary health care coming. Yes, primary health care coming. Yes. It was so dramatic. And one old man came to me and said, oh, my child, if it weren't for you guys from the ANC, I would have had to wait with my wound until I have money at the end of the month. Now with this primary health care that's free, I can come to the clinic. So when people say they criticize that, I said, well, judge it against what it is that was delivered. I'm an evidence-based person, so.
So is there a link between policy restructuring of the health sector and dealing with the crisis in the delivery time, or are the two different?
No, they're not different. They're not different, because that's part of the reason why we immediately restructured and implemented at the same time. It was difficult to do both, I must say, but we did it. And we had a big crisis, and I can tell you what that crisis was in the country, more than anything else that had happened. Around 95, I had just been appointed as Director General after spending 1 year. The first year, it was for transformation, but when I went in, the nurses decided to go on strike. And the nurses that went on strike were not part of the labor movement at all. They were not part of the union that was in the bargaining chamber. And many people were going to die in those hospitals. And I immediately went to General Knobel, who used to be the head of SAMS, which is the South African Military Service, on the health side.
Mm-hmm.
I went to him, I said, "You're going to have to help me." And he says, "With what?" I said, "With your health workers to go and save lives." And he was like, "Eh? You want me to help you with the people to run a hospital, to run this?" I said, "Yes. I want you to station the military people in all of those hospitals to deliver services and save lives because there are no nurses." And he sat down and delivered a master plan. And I sat down with him and looked at it and said, he explained, "This is what you're going to do. This in this province, you'll do this. In this province, you'll do this." And we did it. Believe it or not, I went on television that evening when they were striking and making quite a lot of noise. I went into that on television. And when I arrived there, you know what they said to me? "Here is a big crisis. Do you realize that the country is in flames with regard to, patients dying in hospitals and all that?" And I went there and I said, I actually can empathize with the nurses who say they are not paid very well. And I agree with them. They are not paid very well. Compare them to education, they are not paid very well. But I know what it is we can do. Because they don't belong to any union, I'm prepared to pay for them, even their accommodation, when they are busy negotiating in the unions. But they must choose a union of their own, because I can't negotiate with people that are not part of a union. And that calmed the situation. So that was a crisis that was averted. It was a crisis that was averted.
You one of those people that has been carrying the candle or the light for social justice. Surely that has brought you many a times in trouble with the establishment.
Too many times.
Tell us about that.
First of all, when I came up to say that we need to have a national health insurance and we need to move on speedily with it, and I brought in an Australian who had a great experience in terms of national health insurance, came up with what used to be called the double plan. And that plan would have brought in, given doctors, let's say 2,000 patients per doctor or X number, I think it was 3,000 patients per doctor, I can't even remember. And they would be paid by the state contracted to provide the services. And in other ways, they would be somewhat like state contracted providers. We came up with that plan. Ooh, they came on a ton of bricks on us. How on earth can you come up with something like that that has not been consulted as widely as all that? I said, but we're putting it on the table for consultation. But people didn't want to hear that. The fact that it was developed by a few people and then put out there for consultation, they thought it was bad. Maybe it was a bad judgment on my part, Maybe I should have brought in more people at that time to come in and consult before we actually can put the document out there. Then we went out and we developed this other one with Johnny Broombeck. And when we put it out there, it was accepted. And the reason they accepted it is that it focused a lot more on the primary healthcare component and the regulation of the private sector. Massive regulation of the private sector, but the way it regulated the private sector, they felt that they were comfortable with that kind of regulation. And the reason for that was that Johnny Broombeck came in from the private sector, so he was able to put in quite a lot of ideas there. So the minister decided, no, we can only implement the primary healthcare component. This other part, insofar as hospitals and all that, we cannot implement now. In fact, it's only now that people are beginning to go back and look at that report and then say what it is that you can do with regard to the hospitals, especially in terms of hospital autonomy. So on the national health insurance, I didn't stop there. I continued working on it, and eventually, once I got out of government, I went back to deal with the national health insurance. And I was a spokesperson for it for a very long time. I worked with Comrade Zoeli Mkhize, and he and I went to the the General Council meeting. Am I right? I think you're going to have to correct it. But it's the ANC...
The policy conference.
No, not the policy
The
conference.
so-called elective conference.
Not elective. There is this general. I can't remember. But we went to that
The
meeting.
NGC.
The NGC.
National General Council.
Yes,
You're right.
National General Council. So we went to the NGC.
The
And
ANC's NGC.
yes. And we went to that meeting and announced at the press conference that national health insurance is going to be the policy of this government. This is how it's going to be. But, no, it's a policy of the ANC, and this is how it's going to be. We recrafted it. Instead of it being a government policy, we made it an ANC policy because ANC is the governing party. And at that particular time, the Minister of Health was not in the country. He was outside the country. But it was imperative with the NGC that it be discussed by the NGC. That did not endear me to some of the people in the country because they were like, why on earth would Zweli and you go out and do what it is that we did? But we stood our
But why on
ground.
earth did you and Zweli do what you did?
Why on earth we did it? Because you see, this country had been trying to implement national health insurance at that time for about 70 years, and they had never made any progress. So we felt that the ANC wanted to hear more about it. We had presented it to the National Executive Committee of the ANC. They had looked at it, and we had gone through all those structures, within the Health and Education Subcommittee of the NEC. We'd gone through the ANC, this thing. Now it was stuck in government. Government wasn't releasing it. And we're saying, wait a minute, people in this country need national health insurance. Why are we not going out there and actually releasing it quickly? We felt that the government was too slow. So if the government is too slow, what do? You find another way of being able to get it through. And so we went to the NGC and we released it at that point. And fortunately, when we released it, it wasn't because it was not on the agenda. Zweli made it a point that it was actually on the agenda. So we released it at that particular time. But unfortunately, the Minister of Health at that time had another engagement elsewhere. But we thought that this was too important not to be discussed at the NGC and be accepted by the NGC. And it was discussed, he presented it, and it was actually agreed to.
But you also were in battles with the pharmaceutical companies.
Yes.
Why? Tell us about that, because it seems to me you were at different moments struck by, on the one hand, your commitment to social justice, on the other hand, you had these powerful forces on the health financing side. NHI is an example of that one. But now you're also sitting with the whole pharmaceutical, powerful, big global, multinational companies.
Sure, that was one of the biggest struggles that I can say I've ever had in my life. We decided with the minister, and she and I on policy were like, twin sisters on policy. And what made me to be so strong in what I was doing on policy was because I knew that once she said, I agree with this policy, it's going to be implemented, come hell or high water or whatever. So you knew that the backing was strong. She's not going to back down. She was the kind of person that was like that. So we decided that we need to take on this struggle with the pharmaceutical companies, that the drugs in this country are just way too expensive. We've got too many people living with HIV. They will never be able to obtain the drugs. I went to Lilongwe to represent her, she was supposed to represent the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Alfred Enzo. I was flown to Lilongwe. When I arrived in Lilongwe, it was a meeting of the SADC, and it involved the issue of the drugs. Big time, pharmaceutical company. What do we do with regard to HIV given the drugs? And I went in there and took a hardline position that you cannot leave Africans to die while you are providing treatment for people in Europe and in the United States because you are afraid of round-tripping of the drugs. Round-tripping means that when they take the drugs from Europe and bring them to Africa at a reasonable price, those drugs will go back to Europe and it will benefit the Europeans and they would have lost. I said, you cannot do that. And secondly, they said, we'll never comply with, people will never comply with medication. In other words, adhere to the treatment. They will never do that. It was a fight that people like Mark Haywood, who today is a strong advocate for this, was anti the position I had taken. They thought our own people that are expected to support me on this, they were anti the position. So immediately after that, we had a meeting at the World Health Organization. And at that World Health Organization, for 1 week, there had to be a debate about public interest versus private interest with regard to the revised drug strategy. And I was leading the team of countries coming from the south, largely the ones that are surrounding South Africa, and I was leading the team. What I realized is that we had the whole world against us, and we're so few. So what I had done, I had contacted Ralph Nader in the United States and asked for the lawyers from the US who were very much protecting the public interest to come and backstop us. Mm-hmm. So they set the table outside there while we're busy negotiating. Every time there was a question that we couldn't answer, I would send somebody to go to the bathroom, tell them what it is they want, and that person comes back. And another one, when they go out there, they'll pick up the information. And we debated and eventually forced the entire 192 countries not to take a decision because of the fact that there was no agreement. So, we fought that battle. But eventually, we managed to, with the skill of Nkosazana Zuma, we managed to take that issue to Cuba. And in Cuba, she then managed to get the entire third what is it called? There are 2/3.
The big ones, pharmaceutical. The challenge that you face with this pharmaceutical company and the huge investments and the power of pharmaceutical companies and drug institutions. Then there's the phenomena of the department and the restructuring of the department. Then you had to deal with the whole question of the choice and termination of pregnancy. Ostensibly to real conservative society. Both black and white. Highly Christian. Believing predominantly in life. How did you guys navigate that one? Because that surely must have given you sleepless nights.
Yes. The termination of pregnancy was a difficult one in the sense that we ourselves did not want abortions. We didn't want abortions. But if a woman is going to die, there is no reason why you shouldn't prevent that death from abortion. We felt that it's not about whether we like it or we don't like it. It's more about, can we save the lives of women? That's what won the argument. Because people wanted to put us as people that were destroying lives. You are destroying unborn babies and all of that. And no amount of technical explanation could suffice, to those people who did not believe in termination of pregnancy. But we had to say to them, we agree with you, it's not something that any woman would want to do. They simply do it in order that they can protect the life of the child. And we gave them examples from many parts of the world. We helped to navigate that legislation in the portfolio committee. I spent an inordinate amount of hours working with some of those people in Parliament, trying to explain to them what this legislation is all about. And it came at a time when most of the parliamentarians actually did not understand how to review legislation. They're not lawyers. You know, unlike in the United States where you have people who are in parliament who are lawyers, here they're not. So someone has to sit down and unpack to say, law says this is what it means. So we did that. And in fact, the day we won this in parliament, they came all here to this house, upstairs, and we all celebrated. We were so happy that we were going to be saving a lot of lives. But what we didn't understand at the time was that the law is not everything. What is everything is engaging with the people that are going to be implementing it, convincing them that it is to the benefit of those women to actually do that, regardless of the value system they have. We should have done value clarification with them. So that's one area that I feel I regret we didn't do very well.
But you also came up with against another powerful economic business lobby, which was the tobacco companies.
Yes.
With your anti-smoking laws.
Yes.
In certain public spaces.
We did. And
tell us how did you guys navigate that one? Because it seems to me that the whole process of transformation of the health system and service delivery, but also protecting people's longevity in terms of their lives, you came up with against powerful economic blocks. But you're not saving lives with the changing behavior of people, or changing behavior of people with the anti-health, anti-tobacco and smoking laws.
Well, we do. We actually were very determined that we should use the experience that's coming in from the literature, particularly the United States, which have shown the relationship clearly between tobacco use and health outcomes. And the health outcomes were massively dangerous for people. In other words, many people suffered from so many diseases arising from tobacco smoking. So we took up this issue, and as soon as we took up the issue, the BAT, the British, tobacco.
British American
tobacco, yeah. They came up and they said, no. You cannot do this, because if you do this, there would not be any money for sporting activities, the economy is going to suffer, and so forth. So there were a lot of people that were against it. And it wasn't just the BAT and the other companies, but it was also the ordinary South Africans who believed in smoking and felt that, if you smoke, it's okay. They can give you money. You can be able to watch soccer. We said, no. You can be able to substitute that. Other countries have done that. So here, that's where evidence actually worked. Because by bringing that evidence in front and being steadfast on it, we're definitely able to make a difference with regard to that. Definitely. And we managed to take that again through the legislation in Parliament and eventually made it a point that it was sexually acceptable.
But you did the same with alcohol. You stopped alcohol advertising of it at sports events.
That might have happened after I left, but not when I was in government. Yeah, not after I was in government. Now it's in the terrain of Minister Motsoaledi, that issue. It was not in the terrain of Minister Zuma or Minister Mantu Chabalala.
One of the big issues that seems to be in your space is the whole question of Sarafina.
Yes.
The play that was supposed to bring the importance of HIV and AIDS and the need for prevention and curative elements to it.
Yes.
Give us a sense of Sarafina, but also what was the real break there?
Sarafina was one of those projects that was started just about maybe 2 or 3 weeks before I got into government. And as soon as I got into government and I was responsible there, I found that decisions had already been made that Bongeningem was going to be given the resources to do that. And the justification that was given to me at the time was that, many people don't know about HIV. The traditional methods of getting messages on HIV were not appropriate. They weren't working. And therefore, it was important that a new approach be designed. And that new approach was Sarafina Play. So the tender was given, and I woke up middle of the night. I was going through the files, in middle of the night, and I looked at this thing. I said, what? What's going on? How did we get to 14 million for this particular contract? So I pick up a phone and I call Quresha Karim, who was the director of HIV at the time. And she says, you're waking me up middle of the night. I said, my God, we got a problem. She says, what is it? I said, I see this approval that, this guy, the contract was actually signed. Why was the contract signed before we can actually have a conversation? We should have had a conversation about this before. He says, no, it's not me. It's Mr. Barenost. Barenost is the chief director responsible for supply chain. At the time it was not supply chain management, but it was, related to tender, the unit. And they said, no, that is the amount that, they thought it would be worth. I said, no, this we're going to have a problem. We're going to have a problem. So we sat down and I said, okay, let's be honest. Let's say mistakes were made and just accept the responsibility. The powers that may be would not allow me to make that statement. You cannot make that statement that you made a mistake. I said, look, let's just say we made a mistake. And if you say you made a mistake and you are wrong, people will forgive you. No, you can't accept. And that's where we kind of parted ways with the administration. That's why, because first of all, I personally didn't think that it was worth 14 million. But and it was reported in the press, too, that I went to see it for the first time when it was, performing in Soweto. And I said, this thing is not worth 14 million. Unfortunately, there was a journalist who was standing there, happens to see me and happens to hear me, and then, raised the issue and then went out printing it. But that's not what I supported. But it happened.
Why did you, Dr. Olive Shisana, decide at that time to resign? What went through your mind to make a decision to resign?
It became impossible because there was no longer any trust between the minister and myself, because I couldn't be trusted. How could you trust someone who, you have implemented this program and there are mistakes, and this person is coming in with a different tag and saying, well, let's go ahead and accept that this is the case. So, eventually what I did, I got my lawyers to come and negotiate, a plan for exit. And we put it to the lawyers, and Esa Musa, who was now was a judge now.
High Court judge.
Yeah, he was the one that handled the case together with his team. I said to them, guys, there is no way that we're going to be able to work together. However, they must pay me out the remainder of my contract, so I leave this institution. And the minister also did not feel like working with someone like me. So it was a contract redetermination because both sides did not feel that we can work together, because it was difficult for me to work, under those circumstances, and it was difficult for her also to have a director general who she didn't trust in. Broke it kind of broke all of that. But anyway, at the end, we resolved our conflict. I met her I was now working for the World Health Organization, and I met her in Harare, and we were together, just the two of us in an elevator. So we're bound to talk to one another. It's a strange
place to be alone with somebody.
Exactly. So we started talking about our kids and all that, and then we said, okay, we did all of that because we're in government, but I am outside government, so there's no hard feelings or anything. So we kind of like mended our relationship, as because we worked together before I went into government. She used to work for the MRC, and I used to work for the MRC too.
That's quite a happy ending.
It is.
After all these years in public service, and you continue to be in public service, what are the 3 lessons that you'll tell any public servants based on your own experience? Any public servant based on your own experience?
One is that you must be clear what it is that needs to be accomplished. Number 2, you must have the determination to make sure it happens. And number 3, you must have integrity. Those 3 things are key. If you don't know where you're going, also they'll take you everywhere. So listen to what people say, but be clear where you're going. Don't let people take you to where you don't want to go. And be determined. And when you're determined, it means that even if there are spears coming and falling this way and that way, just be like a rock of Gibraltar. Stand firm in terms of where you want to go. And number 3, do not allow yourself to lose integrity, because that's the only thing you have in life. The only thing you have in life at the end of all of these things is integrity. If you lose that, forget it.
There's lots of complexities in South Africa currently. From different angles, governance questions, leadership questions, management questions. From your own experience, what would you say are 2 key lessons for the current, for anybody that wants to get into a leadership position, for anybody that is occupying a leadership position, and even whether they sit in business or in politics, in parliament or in legislature, what would you say to them, given what's been going on for the last 15 years?
What I would say to people, first of all, ask yourself a question. Is what I'm doing going to be beneficial to the people of this country or not? If in your own honest assessment you conclude that this is beneficial for the people of South Africa, do it. If you have any doubts that it will be beneficial to the majority of the people of this country, don't do it. Don't do it. Put the people of South Africa first and put yourself last. That's what we need to do. And if we can do that, I do believe we'll have a great South Africa. This country has got great resources. It's got great people. It's got great minerals. It's got great, infrastructure that was built, especially after 1994. And we're strategically located. Weather-wise, things are good. We've got so many things that are good, that we can build upon. Let us build upon that and create that South Africa that everybody would be happy to become part of.